welcome back to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Today we've got a great show for you. I'm actually working from my home studio as opposed to my whiteboard in the office today. Our power went out, so I had a lot of nice visuals planned for you, but we're going to ad-lib it. So welcome to the show. If you know the drill, let me know where you're from. Chime in, let me know that my voice is coming in loud and clear and that you can hear me, and we will get started. So it looks like a few of you are starting to chime in already. We've got Lauren from Ontario, Canada. We've got Pina from, well, I don't know where you're from, Pina. Let me know where you're from. Mary or Marie is from Toronto. We got a lot of Canadians tonight. Tracy from South Carolina. We got Patrice from Great Britain. And Tracy, I said that, from South Carolina. So yeah, let me know again, where are you from? Pina, you're from Staten Island, New York. So we got Nicole chiming in as well from Aurora, Illinois. And Mavis also from Illinois. Maxine chiming in. Hi, Maxine. We've got Lynn from Australia. Thanks for the welcome back. I missed a few weeks, so appreciate all of your heartfelt prayers and thoughts as my family has gone through a trying time. And Lori from Sheboygan. Is that how you say that? Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Maxine from Pennsylvania. Okay, Cherie, keep chiming in, keep letting me know as you come on board. Tonight we've got a really interesting topic. A lot of requests have come in over the last few months for this topic, so I couldn't keep ignoring it. So tonight we're going to be talking about gluten mimicking foods. These are foods that a lot of people think are gluten-free, and or these are foods that are actually gluten-free, but that their structures, their protein structures, can actually mimic gluten, and so they can create what's known as a secondary effect. And so oftentimes when the gut's damaged, these proteins can start to look like each other. And again, the issue then becomes, why is a person who's on a gluten-free diet not getting better? So many of you may have fallen into that category at some point or another. Maybe many of you are also struggling. And so we want to dive into this topic tonight. Before we do, I also want to make sure that if you haven't already, if you're not aware of it, that you can go to glutenfreesociety.org and you can sign up there. If you don't already have our gluten-free starter kit, it's our survival kit. It's everything you need to know to get started on the true gluten-free diet as opposed to the traditional gluten-free diet. So there's a lot in that. You can pick that up at glutenfreesociety.org. It's free, no cost to you. We just want to make sure that you've got great information in your hands. So let's dive in tonight with gluten mimicking foods. So the first gluten mimicking food are really it's a grouping, are the classic gluten-free grains. Now these are things that oftentimes a person gets a diagnosis of celiac disease or a person gets a diagnosis of gluten sensitivity. Generally the hospitals, the nutritionists, the traditionally trained practitioners will tell you that you need to avoid wheat, that you need to avoid barley, you need to avoid rye. And some of them will tell you oats, and others will tell you that oats are okay. So there's even a little bit of confusion about whether oats are safe or not. Actually, in my opinion, there's no confusion at all. But the classic gluten-free grains, again, these are wheat, barley, and rye, and sometimes oats. But there are other grains that oftentimes are put into the safe category, blanketed right into the safe category, even though they're really not all that safe. And so these grains predominantly are millet. If you want to write this down, millet, sorghum, corn, and rice are the big ones. Those are the big four that are actually grains that actually do contain gluten, and they're not really mimicking gluten. They actually contain it. But I wanted to talk about these within the confines of this conversation because so many people don't realize. They think gluten mimicking, and they don't even realize that these grains contain gluten. If you'd like to learn more about those, I'm going to put up a video link for you to watch this, and I'm just going to dump it right into the feed here. Let's see here, we're pulling it up right now. So this video is one that I created, and it has a lot of the science behind what I'm talking about here, because a lot of you, you love me for the science. You love me because I put the science into perspective, and I don't just give you anecdote and opinion. Many of you, I can see it. All rice, yes. Tracy's asking, all rice, yes, all rice. All rice has gluten. White rice too, black rice, brown rice, whole grain rice, processed rice, rice cakes, things that are made from rice flour. These are problematic. Remember that rice contains a form of gluten, and even though it's not the gluten that's found in wheat, which most people think is the biggest problem, rice is actually, it is actually a grain that does contain gluten. It's just, again, it's a different form. It's a different type of gluten. Now, rice, on a secondary note, rice is very, very high in cadmium and arsenic, and there's some studies now showing that there's lead in rice, and it doesn't matter whether it's grown organically or not. I know that's probably the next question coming up. What about organic rice? No, organic rice contains gluten, and it will create problems for people trying to go on a gluten-free diet. So you've got to keep those things into perspective. Rice is a big no-no. Again, I'm going to post, here's a link to, again, a video. I just put it up in the feed for you. For those of you who want to go back and watch it, it's about a 45-minute video on, and there's a lot of clarity on corn and rice and the research behind that. So we've got, somebody's coming in with the question. I'll get to you, Mary. What the heck can I eat? We'll get to you. Don't panic. Wild rice is not a grain. So unlike the other grains, the wheat, the barley, the rye, the oats, the corn, the rice, the spelt, the millet, the sorghum, etc., wild rice is actually a marsh grass. So it's technically not a grain at all. So it's very safe to consume if you're trying to follow a gluten-free diet. It is not part of the gluten mimicking components to grain. So Marie is asking, and I'm sure many of you may be thinking this, what the heck can I eat? Well, don't look for grain-based substitutes. It's number one reason I wrote No Grain, No Pain, because 92% of people that go on a gluten-free diet in the traditional sense continue to have persistent inflammation beyond going on that diet. And this has been very well documented in research. This is, again, this is not me just giving you anecdote. This is me regurgitating what I've seen in my clinic, but also what the research shows is that people that go gluten-free have persistent inflammation and persistent damage in the GI tract if they continue to buy these foods that we're talking about today. So rice, we want to keep rice out. Yes, Cheryl, rice vinegar too, keep it out. If you see the term rice, and where a lot of people get into trouble here is they look to purchase rice-based supplements, and I see this all the time, and they'll say that they're gluten-free, but it'll say on the back of the product, it will say something to the extent of rice powder or rice syrup. You know, these are taboo words that, you know, you want to make sure that you're avoiding. Rice powder is a no-no, and it's in a lot of supplements that claim to be gluten-free. This is also one of the reasons why I put a lot of the supplements that we carry in my clinic online, so that people would quit buying products that were contaminated with other forms of gluten and trying to do something right for their health and end up getting hurt by a good intention. So again, rice powder is definitely a no-no. So rice is out. Let's talk about, again, classic gluten-free grains. Millet is out. Sorghum is another one that's out. Now, sorghum is used in a lot of the gluten-free beers that are being put out on the market today. Sorghum is being used more and more in like what they're calling gluten-free pizza crust, even though it's technically sorghum's not gluten-free. There is a form of gluten in sorghum that does cause an inflammatory problem for people with gluten sensitivity. And then corn is really the biggest one. Corn, and I'm going to put some research up for you on corn. We've got a lot of information and a lot of research studies that have shown how corn gluten can actually damage people with gluten sensitivity. So I'm going to put up, again, a link in the feed for you, because I don't want you to just watch this and say this guy doesn't have any research to back up what he's saying. So here's that link on corn gluten. It's in the feed now. I just pumped it in. So you should be seeing that show up. So Chris, you're going to have to watch the replay on why rice is out. I'm not going to go back into it, but yes, it is in the book. So those of you who do not have a copy of the book, No Grain, No Pain, you've got to make sure that you have that. I think, again, I've said this a number of times, as you tune into the show every Monday at 6, we like to start from the premise that you've read No Grain, No Pain, because that gives you a backdrop and a background to understand a lot more of what we're talking about within the confines of the show. So if you haven't picked up a copy, you can find that in Barnes & Noble. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it in all major book retailers across the country. And it's actually, even if you're tuning in from across the pond, we have an Australian version. We also have a UK version. And if you're from China, we have a Chinese version. We've got a German and a Polish version. So yes, if it doesn't really matter where you're from, we should have the version that fits your language so that you can get the information. Okay, let's see here. So we talked about the classic gluten-free grains. I want to dive into the pseudo grains because these are a little bit different. These are not the same thing as grains. Pseudo grain meaning false. So technically pseudo grains are not grains. And so when I'm talking about pseudo grains, we're referring to things like quinoa, buckwheat, and amaranth. And so many of you may have seen the quinoa. I'm going to put it up there for you. Quinoa pastas and the quinoa noodles and things of that nature. Well, quinoa, it doesn't have gluten. Technically, it is gluten-free, but there was a study done in 2012 on quinoa. There are a couple different proteins in quinoa that have been shown to look so much like gluten that people with gluten sensitivity actually react to them. Now, quizzing the audience here, how many of you that are tuning in tonight that are listening have tried quinoa and felt a horrible reaction? And I want to get this feedback. If that's happened to you, just type in yes right now, and let's just see how many in the feed are coming back with a positive quinoa reaction when they've tried it. And I want to just do another poll too. How many of you have done the same thing with rice? So type in yes for quinoa. Type in the number 1 if you've reacted to rice. Type in the number 2 if you've reacted to corn. I just want to get a sense for how many people that are tuning in, that are listening, have actually reacted to what we're talking about tonight. And I want the other people that are listening that might be kind of trying to make these changes and trying to move in the right direction, who are struggling in their own mind, thinking, what am I going to eat? I just want you to have the support and connect with these people who are reacting. You're going to get, you can see my screen board is just lit up. It's just, so many of you are typing in yes, and so many of you are typing in 1s and 2s, etc., to say that yes, you have reacted to those grains when you try to introduce them. And this is such a common thing. As a matter of fact, when I first started saying this over 10 years ago, I was ostracized by the celiac community. Most of the major researchers, they put their noses up at me. They wouldn't talk to me anymore. Actually, well, I won't get into that. We had some hate mail. We had a guy create a video one time where he wished I would die in a fiery car crash. How's that for hate mail? But at any rate, this is part of the reason why I wrote No Grain, No Pain, and I included 23 pages of medical references, because so many people are saying that what I'm saying isn't true, but yet there's science to back everything up that we're talking about here tonight. And I want you to get that information, because if you have that information, you can make the changes. If you make the changes, you can get better. If you get better, you can share that information with somebody else. Remember what our mission is. Our mission, Gluten-Free Society's mission, is to help 100 million people with chronic illness find real answers and get help. And together we can do that. We spread this word. It works. It's a grassroots effort, and I need your help to do it. So again, we're talking about quinoa as being one. And I told you there was a study done on quinoa a few years ago that actually showed quinoa creates a reaction in people with gluten sensitivity that is very much like a true gluten reaction. Another one is buckwheat. And buckwheat, again, technically not a grain, but buckwheat, there's a couple problems with buckwheat. One is it can mimic it. So it can, just like quinoa, it can mimic gluten for many people, creating reactions. Another big problem with buckwheat is the cross-contamination issue. There's huge cross-contamination issues with buckwheat. A lot of people that try to consume buckwheat, it can be highly cross-contaminated with wheat. And a lot of these things are produced in the same factories. In essence, when they're processing it, they're using the same machines to process these grains and pseudo grains. And so cross-contamination is a very, very real problem for a lot of those of you who are trying to eat buckwheat. Same thing with amaranth. Amaranth is the third pseudo grain. And amaranth, it's the same problem. The cross-contamination issue is very, very high. But again, in addition to the cross-contamination issue, you've got the issue of mimicking. It can actually, the proteins in amaranth can mimic the proteins and other grains and the gluten-based proteins. Remember, when I say gluten, a lot of people are so confused about gluten because they're thinking of gluten as one protein and not a family of proteins. Remember, you read No Grain, No Pain, you know this, that gluten is not a singular term. Gluten is a kind of a catch-all term for the several hundred, if not up to 1,000 different forms in different grains. Wheat alone has gliadin as a form of gluten, but there are several hundred different forms of proteins in wheat that are gluten proteins that are not alpha gliadin. And that's important for you to understand, in that each grain has different forms of gluten. There's not just one gluten. And this is why a lot of the lab tests, when doctors try to run tests for gluten sensitivity, this is why a lot of them come back normal, or a lot of them come back false negative. You've been tested for wheat gluten, but you haven't been tested for corn gluten, rice gluten, or any of the other types of glutens. And that, again, there's not a lab out there currently that does all of that spectrum. The best way, we've talked about this too before, the best way to get tested for gluten sensitivity is to do genetic testing. And the reason why is the genes themselves are responsible. The genes we like to measure are responsible for creating the antenna on your immune system that recognizes the gluten family of proteins as a friend or as an enemy. So if you know what your genes are, you can change your diet according to your genetics, as opposed to change your diet according to what your immune system is doing today. Genetic testing is definitely the gold standard for understanding whether or not you should be avoiding all these different forms of gluten. And I just, again, for those of you who aren't familiar with genetic testing, I just put a link up to genetic testing for you so you can read more about it and learn more about it. Now, there are some other tests. No, somebody's asking about, and I don't like to really talk about other labs, because some of these labs are good labs, but they're not comprehensive enough. And this is an example of that. This test, called a wheat zoomer, only really looks at a handful of different types of gluten proteins. Remember, there are up to 1,000 different forms of gluten proteins, and we're looking at maybe 25, 35 different types of gluten. That doesn't even scratch the surface on the quantity of different glutens that there are. So although that test is a lot more comprehensive than many others, it's still not as definitive as genetic testing. Genetic testing, if I can just burn that into your minds, genetic testing is the way to go. So keep that in mind. So we talked about the pseudo grains, the quinoa, the buckwheat, the amaranth. Now let's talk about dairy. This is a big one, because a lot of people, if you've ever heard of the gluten-free, casein-free diet, there's a reason why that diet exists. It actually was started in the autism community because so many kids were benefiting from a gluten-free diet, but benefiting even more from a gluten casein-free diet. And one of the reasons why autism, many people with autism are gluten sensitive, is actually it can be one of the big triggers for autistic disorder. It's not the only trigger, but it can be a very big one. And so the dairy, though, the casein, there's a protein in dairy called casein that oftentimes does look like gluten. And so, especially if it's casein that's derived from the A1 variety of cow. So there are different breeds of cows, and there are different breeds of cows. Most of the milk and the dairy product in the United States is what we call A1 dairy. Actually, in most industrialized nations, it's A1 milk. And this particular casein has a tendency to create an inflammatory response and tend to contribute to autoimmunity and look a lot like gluten. So this is one that I highly recommend that you avoid. This is part of the reason why we take dairy out of the diets, even if a person's not technically allergic to dairy. If the dairy is looking like gluten and the person is gluten sensitive, they're still going to have that reaction. Now, one of the other things in dairy that can actually make it look more like gluten, there's an enzyme that's used in processing of dairy. And this enzyme, also known oftentimes as meat glue or MTG, microbial transglutaminase for short. But meat glue is oftentimes used as an additive. And so what happens is many people who are using dairy, that dairy has been processed using this enzyme, because this enzyme helps to extend shelf life. And so we get a shelf life extension at the cost of an alteration of the proteins in the product, which now make that product look like gluten even more aggressively, so the person tends to react to it even more. I'm going to put a link up. I'm putting a lot of information in the feed tonight for all of you, because this is just a topic that's very broad. But I'm going to put a link up on meat glue, and that way, if you want to go back after the show and look more about microbial transglutaminase, you can do that. Another issue with dairy in general, and especially in the US, is that the cows, the diet of the animals. Now, we've done studies in humans, and we absolutely know beyond the shadow of a doubt that breast milk contains gluten if mom is eating gluten. So, we've done the research and we know that to be the case in humans. Nobody's done that research in cows. We don't know for certain whether or not that happens. I want to be clear because that science has not been done yet. However, that being the case, we do have to have a sense of caution about it. And again, many people drink the dairy, and these cows are being pinned up, and all they're being fed is grain. And so the nature of the possibility that it could show up in cow's milk is there. Technically, we don't know for certain, but in humans, we know it happens. So we have to, again, my advice is to err on the side of caution. Now, here's a study on breast milk and gluten being found in breast milk for those of you who want to read more about that aspect, because I've also seen it where kids were very sick, and actually doctors were telling the mothers that the children are actually allergic to mom's breast milk, which in a sense is true, but it's also not true at all. If mom changes her diet, oftentimes any baby that's been told, or any parent that's been told that their child is allergic to the breast milk, oftentimes does just fine when the diet of the mother is well controlled and eliminating the allergen. So again, we've got to be careful with the grain-fed cow. So if you're getting your dairy, obviously a better choice would be finding A2 dairy, not A1, and finding non-processed. So finding a local farmer who basically pasture feeds their cows and has an A2 genetic breeding of their cows as opposed to an A1 breeding. So all very, very important in terms of whether or not you want to reduce or minimize your potential possibility for reacting to it. Now, a couple of other questions are coming through here. So I want to back up because a lot of you, I think I talked about rice, and so many of you didn't realize about rice that I think it just, I think it put the audience into shock to a certain extent. So rice is not okay. Rice vinegar is not okay. Rice pasta is not okay. Rice powder is not okay. Wild rice is okay. So wild rice, technically not a grain. Next question coming in on what about gluten-free quinoa? Gabriella, the answer to that question is no, it's not. Quinoa does not contain gluten. Remember, the show is not so much about things that contain gluten as much as it is about things that mimic gluten. And quinoa the proteins in quinoa mimic gluten. So technically it can say gluten-free, and that's perfectly legal and perfectly fine. But the reality is that the proteins within quinoa look so much like gluten that people who are gluten sensitive are reacting to them and having an inflammatory response. So there were several of you that asked questions about quinoa. Again, Jeff is asking about arrowroot. Arrowroot is perfectly fine. We don't know anything. There hasn't been any research that has shown that arrowroot is a major issue. And in my own clinical experience, I haven't seen arrowroot be a major issue outside of the fact that it can be highly glycemic, and so people can overdo it. Another one people can overdo is tapioca. Now, tapioca is perfectly fine. It's safe. It's gluten-free, but it's very high. It'll break down and it'll convert into sugar very quickly, just like arrowroot. So if you're struggling with weight loss, you're struggling with diabetes or heart disease, if you're struggling with trying to balance your blood sugar, these options, arrowroot and tapioca, which are commonly found in flour form or used as substitutes, they can be problematic for that reason, but not because of gluten or gluten mimicking. Same thing with cassava. Cassava falls in the category of tapioca and the category of arrowroot. It's perfectly fine, it's perfectly safe, but again, if you're trying to control your weight or your blood sugar, then it can become problematic for a completely different reason. Yeah, I like this question. I know rice isn't good. It doesn't matter how many times you rinse it, right? I have a friend asking if this is safe. No, you can rinse it all day long. You're not going to rinse the protein. You're not going to rinse the gluten out of rice. Remember that the grains that are classically being labeled as gluten-free, which are your sorghum, your corn, your rice, your millet, they're not gluten-free. Technically, they're not gluten-free at all. And oats falls in that same category. As a matter of fact, let's see here if I have I might have a picture of a diagram. Let me just see if I can pull it up, because if I have it, I'll post it and share it with you guys. And let's see here. I might just not have it, but I'll look for it for you. Yeah, it doesn't look like I have it, but what I'll do instead is I'll put up a link, and on this post, it's a post about oats, because many of you are, you may be wondering about oats. Oats are technically not gluten-free, and oats are, there is a form of gluten in oats called avenin. That's the name of the gluten found in oats that can be problematic for people with gluten sensitivity. So again, a lot of people, go to the oatmeal or the other oat-based cereals, and they really make that mistake. This diagram, so I'm going to post this up for you. This diagram that I'm talking about, it has a list of several grains that actually contain glutens and some of the different names of those glutens. I'm going to post that. It's going up in the feed right now. You're going to see that article popping up on oats, and that there's a diagram in there that lists the different grains and the different glutens found within those grains, just so you have a good idea that, look, traditionally the grains that they're calling gluten-free are not technically gluten-free. They're gliadin-free. They're free of a specific type of gluten, gliadin, which is found in wheat, barley, and rye. But remember, there's more than just gliadin to consider when it comes to gluten, and that's the problem. Most people don't get that information. This is a great question. Chris is asking, how can I get someone to gain weight without grain? Easy. When you nourish the body doesn't struggle with gaining weight. Where people lose weight and keep their weight off, especially celiacs, is because they're eating food that causes damage to their gut and they're malabsorbing their nutrients. And this is the problem. A lot of people think, well, if I quit eating the rice, I'm going to lose weight. What's going to happen is when you quit eating the rice, the damage to your intestines is going to stop, and you're going to absorb the nutrients from the food that you are eating much better and potentially gain weight more effectively and more efficiently. So don't fear avoiding grain for weight loss. Weight loss may happen even if you're already what you feel like is underweight. You may even still lose another 3 to 5 pounds going gluten-free, true gluten-free. Don't fear that component of doing it, because that's generally water weight that you're going to lose. Weight always, in the end, weight always stabilizes out, in my experience. Weight always stabilizes out, and people always start to gain their weight back if they do it right. So in order to do it right, you've got to get those things out, because they damage the GI tract and cause malabsorption, and that's where a lot of the weight loss comes from. Let's see here. I like this. Nicole says, you don't even need the science. Just try eliminating the foods and see how you feel. The proof is in how you end up feeling. I like that, Nicole, but also I will say, yeah, I think we do need the science, because some people don't want to just change their diet. They want to have the justification for why to change their diet. So although you may be strong enough to do that, a lot of people need that extra help. So let's see here. Donna's just saying, thank you for all you do to help us. If not for you, I would be so sick. 13 years now. I feel pretty great. Thanks for chiming in, Donna. Good to hear from you. All right. Let's see. Yeah, I want to point this out, because Mary's saying, yeah, that negative. So sounds like she's been tested for gluten sensitivity and gotten false negative results and spending all her money on creams. And I'm quoting you, Mary, BS, to stop your reactions. And you're absolutely right. Look, those reactions are occurring for a reason, and that's really where so many people struggle. Is they don't realize that the reactions are coming from their behaviors and from their choices, and not from this like mysterious disease or illness that didn't exist 500 years ago. Natasha, so see a geneticist. If you're talking about gluten sensitive genetics, you don't have to see a geneticist to get tested. There's actually a service online. You can go as part of our mission, glutenfreesociety.org. You can get genetic testing done there without a doctor's note and you can know whether or not that's something you need to do in your diet, staying gluten-free. Okay. So the question's coming in from Maria. What about grass-fed cheese? No, I mean, if we're talking about dairy, grass-fed cheese, I mean, it's a step in the right direction. But if you are buying your dairy from the grocery store and it's from A1 cows, or if that cheese is processed with microbial transglutaminase to extend its shelf life, no, I don't recommend it. For most people, I mean, if you read No Grain, No Pain, one of the reasons we cut gluten, or not gluten, but dairy out for that 30-day protocol is because the vast majority of people and the dairy that they're consuming is the wrong kind of dairy. Now, if you have your own property and you have your own genetically certified A2 cows, I would have a different conversation with you, or I would maybe steer you in a different direction. But that's not the case for the vast majority of people. So, I don't recommend it. Grass-fed meat is safe. So grass-fed cheese, no. Grass-fed meat, yes. My thoughts on organic milk. So that question's coming in. I think organic milk is really kind of a scam, because all that really means is that the cows are being fed organic grain, and cows are not designed to eat grain into the quantity that they're feeding it to them. So think of it, if I locked you in a closet and fed you nothing but grain, and well, this is kind of a morbid thought. If you were a female and just had a baby and we milk that milk, how healthy would that milk be? It wouldn't be very healthy. And we could still call it organic because we were feeding something organic grain, but it doesn't mean that it's healthy. So in this case, organic milk, not the greatest. Plus, when you buy it in the grocery store, it's ultra pasteurized, so they've burnt out a lot of the protein and a lot of the nourishment from it. Let's see, just a ton of questions coming in. I'm trying to filter them as we talk here. Ghee, Maxine's asking about ghee. I don't recommend it. Again, it's another one of those I don't recommend if you're really struggling to get better and you're using ghee because you read on somebody's blog that ghee should be okay and safe. I see more people react to ghee and be allergic to it. It's a very, very common one. And at the same time, remember, it goes back to how it's being processed and what the cow was fed. It's going back to the genetics of the cow itself. So don't recommend ghee unless you can verify all those things. Let's see, I think I answered the question already about cassava. Oh, thank you so much, Marie Louise, for chiming in. She says that thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. It has helped me so much. I love hearing that. I mean, as a matter of fact, that makes my day. Anytime somebody posts that my information that I freely give helps them, that makes my day because it makes it worth it to me. When I do these shows, of course, I'm taking time away from my family, time away from my office to help people out there who just haven't been able to find somebody who can help them. So when you give me that kind of feedback, it just totally makes doing these shows worth it for me and my heart. So thank you for that. I like this. Mary's saying, oats always make me feel horrible. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's what I typically see in people that are gluten sensitive, that, they try to consume oats. They tend to react to them. How about chickpea flour? Look, the problem with the chickpea flours, it's not that they have grain unless they're cross-contaminated with grain. So like your legume-based flours, they can be really hard to digest. And so if you've got gluten sensitivity and predominantly the gluten was affecting your GI tract, understand that it was affecting your ability to break food down. It was affecting your ability to properly digest and absorb and secrete digestive enzymes. And so when you throw in a lot of legume or bean, including the flours, and so a lot of you will go to, I've seen people go to the mung beans, like the pasta, like the glass noodles. I've seen people gravitate toward like the legume-based pastas, and then they struggle. They get a lot of gas and a lot of bloating, and it's because these types of foods can be extremely hard to digest on a gut that's already compromised trying to make a recovery. So you've got to be careful with those things. A variety of fish and a variety of different game like elk and venison, etc. You've also got the fruits and the vegetable family, and there are 300 plus varieties of fruits and vegetables, and you've also got nuts. multiple varieties of nuts. So most people, it's not an issue of what can we eat. It's an issue of how you can expand the knowledge of how to prepare food using foods that are already out there and already available that you've just not really eaten before, so you lack the experience. Key thing is the way you overcome that is you get in the kitchen and you prep and you experience new foods and new items, and you discover new things that you like, and you stay consistent with it. That's what you can do. And again, this is not a restrictive diet. I mean, that's a myth. The fact of the matter is that most people in industrialized nations, 90% of their caloric intake is coming from dairy and grain. And so they think that somehow makes their diet full of variety, because they're getting, 15 different types of cereals, pastas, and breads, and they're getting multiple ways that you can take dairy. There's ice cream, and there's milk, and there's butter, and there's cheese, and there's ghee. And they think that that's variety. That's not variety. That's morphing the same substance into different things and calling it different names and claiming that that's variety, but it's really not variety at all. So expand your palate by learning more about what's available, what seasonal produce is available for you out there that you can consume. This is one of the most powerful things that you can do for the long term, because where most people fail in this is they fail with the frustration of that very thing. What can you eat? So dive in, check out, there's a lot of great recipe books that are out there. And if you look for gluten-free recipe books, you'll be sorely disappointed after tonight's show. But if you look for books that are more paleo oriented, the ones that are grain-free and dairy-free, then you'll avoid most of those gluten mimickers just by nature of the definition of what paleo actually means. Kind bars, are they gluten-free? Amy's asking. I think the last time I looked at a Kind bar label, they had rice syrup in them, so I would not touch them because of that. Just wouldn't do it. Let's see here. I sometimes wonder, are there people who should never have any carbs except for sweet potato? All grains hurt, even if they are not doing microscopic damage. The sorghum and tapioca was the only ones that did not hurt. But no, I mean, I don't think we should say that never have any carb. Carb is an essential nutrient. We need carbohydrates. Now, there's a very big popular diet right now called the ketogenic diet. And look, the diet is fine, but it's really more designed for a few things. It's not designed necessarily for people to sustain forever just because, not without justification. I mean, some people do better on a ketogenic diet. There's no doubt about it. But ketogenic diets, therapeutically are more designed for people trying to lose weight, for people with neurological disease, for people that have cancer, that are trying to starve out the cancer. This is what that diet is really super effective for. Now, if you have the genetics of an Eskimo or an Inuit, then the ketogenic diet is probably right up your alley, because the traditional diet of these people who, eat 90% whale fat, they thrive on a ketogenic diet. Now, if you come from from the Northern European or Southern European countries, then probably 90% fat is not going to be the right move for you. You might do a ketogenic diet temporarily, but it's probably not a great idea to try to sustain it indefinitely. Some people feel better on a ketogenic diet, not because the ketogenic diet is so magical, but because they've been carbohydrate toxic for so long, they've just gone the opposite direction. They're taking the carbs out and they're adding and replacing that with mostly fat, and they feel better because their body's no longer having to process toxic quantities of carbohydrates. It's lost its ability to do that. That doesn't mean you should never eat carbs again. It just means you've got to rebalance that. And really, generally, when I have somebody who is in pretty good health, my general recommendation, again, this is a general recommendation, is that you get an equal distribution of carbs, fats, and proteins. So you think of your plate as a pie and think of it as 3 pieces. You've got a third. I call it the rule of thirds: a third protein, a third fat, and a third carbohydrate. Today, the average American standard diet is 60 to 70% carbohydrate. That's what I meant earlier by saying carbohydrate toxic. It's too high in carbohydrates, and nobody can process that quantity of carbohydrates long term without developing weight issues and blood sugar issues and heart issues. Oh, I like this question, Gabriella. What is the relationship between anemia, grains, and leaky gut? Well, there's a lot of connections, but I'll draw the most obvious and the most common one is that gluten and grains in general can damage your stomach. And there's a special cell in your stomach called the parietal cell. That cell is responsible for pumping out hydrochloric acid. It's the acid that's necessary to break the iron off the meat so that you can absorb the iron. So what happens when people consume grain and they shouldn't is it damages their stomach's capacity to make acid, causing iron malabsorption. The iron malabsorption causes anemia. Now, when you have anemia, understand that that's a lack of oxygen, and that lack of oxygen will create a lot of different symptoms. And one of the things it can contribute to is an inability to recover a leaky gut. Grains by themselves can cause leaky gut, and part of that is the same damage they do to the stomach, they do to the intestines, which is where the barrier is. The gastrointestinal barrier is in the intestine, and so the grains can not only compromise the cells that produce acid in the stomach, it can compromise the gastrointestinal barrier, creating a leaky gut. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see here. Can one be sensitive to carbs in general? Yes, and this is actually a very common thing, especially if you've tried going gluten-free and maybe you're not feeling better and you're trying to come back from that. What happens to a lot of people is their inability to produce the enzymes that digest carbohydrates is gone because of the damage caused by gluten to the intestine. And that can be part of the problem, and that can take 6, 12, 18 months for recovering that. So some people are carbohydrate sensitive for many, many months, even after going gluten-free. And a lot of times what I see is people can start to gravitate a little bit of carbohydrate back into the diet. But again, the gut's got to be healed first. Okay, and those of you who do really, really well on a low-carb diet, I mean, it's a ketogenic diet typically, and that, again, that doesn't mean that you have to be low carb forever, but it may be that you are one of those people that just do better and thrive more on a lower carbohydrate diet. So, time is what bears that answer for you. Ember, it is a great question for the topic. Is there any connection or cross reaction to fruits and legumes? While on a gluten challenge last March for testing, I became allergic to all fruits and legumes as well. Not really. I mean, where we see legumes being a problem, not so much fruits. Again, where fruits become a problem is when you've been eating carbohydrate toxic load for so long. Fruits, fruits are carbohydrate, predominantly simple sugar. And even though they do have fiber, many people don't do well with them after the gluten has wreaked its damage on the ability to produce digestive enzymes to break the fruit down. But a lot of people also gravitate to try to eat these bars. And these bars, you're getting these dehydrated fruit, and the enzymes are dead. There's no enzymes. Remember, natural fruit in its whole form has enzymes in it that helps you digest it. But when you buy these processed and packaged foods, those are not going to have the digestive enzymes in them to help you break them down. So that can, for many people, create a challenge. As far as legumes are concerned, legumes are basically they're a seed in a sense. And so remember, they contain a lot of proteins. They contain a lot of lectins and other things that can make it hard to digest. So a lot of people aren't really having a gluten reaction to legumes, but they've got a compromised GI tract and they're trying to eat legumes and they feel like they're reacting to them, even though it's less of an inflammatory allergic response and more of a lack or inability to digest because the gut's compromised. And we've got to get the gut back up and running before you can start throwing heavy quantities of legumes at it. Let's see. So, when I say no dairy, the questions always come in, well, what about kefir? Kefir's this, I don't recommend, again, the rules on dairy apply no matter what the byproduct of the dairy is. So if you're going to use dairy, if you're going to use it, I would highly recommend that it's A2 dairy and that it is raw, and you do your own, you make your own kefir at home, or you do your own starter kit, your own culture kit. Let's see here. Almond or coconut milk. Don't recommend almond or coconut milk if they contain some of the gums that can be difficult to digest, or some of the gums that are actually corn derivatives. For example, xanthan gum is a corn derivative, and any gum that contains, or any milk product that can, what I call pseudo milk, because they're not really milk, almond milk and coconut milk are just water and coconut or almonds, and then thickened with gums. And again, if they're thickened with gums that are not healthy for you, I don't recommend them. But as a general rule of thumb, if they're not, they're perfectly fine. Let's see. Virgit is saying, just ordered Gluten Shield for my son who's going on vacation. Should he use it every time he eats out? Yes. So this is a good question, and here's why. Many of you are traveling. Many of you have jobs that require that you travel. You know, you're trying to avoid gluten and gluten mimicking foods, but it can be very challenging, right? It can be very challenging when you're traveling. And so Gluten Shield, for those of you who don't know what Gluten Shield is, it is a specialized blend of digestive enzymes that the entire design is to help reduce your damage if you do get exposure to gluten. So again, it's not designed to help you eat gluten. It's not designed so that you can go and eat a big pizza. It's designed to help prevent the damage from accidental exposure to gluten. So there are a lot of companies that are out there that say, you know, take our product because you can eat all the gluten you want. And that's very unethical marketing, in my opinion. Those people, they should be shut down, because it's a very, very bad idea if you're gluten sensitive to think that you can take a digestive enzyme and go eat all the gluten you want. It's just not a true statement. I'll put a link up there for those of you who want to look at Gluten Shield, and you can check it out. But yeah, 2 capsules of Gluten Shield 10 minutes before eating. I call it, when you're traveling, I call it OPF, other people's food. Anytime you eat OPF, you definitely want to take your Gluten Shield and protect yourself from the potential for either cross-contamination or accidental exposure. I like this. We need to, you know, we were talking, Aloma says, your book was helpful. You need a t-shirt, no grain, no pain. It's my mantra. I love that. We were just passing that around, that idea around in a team meeting the other day at the office about t-shirt design. So thanks for chiming in, because that's actually coming your way. We're getting ready to design it. Oh, love it. Nicole says, thank you, Dr. Osborne. You've helped me and my mom just from reading your book and watching your videos. Thank you. You're welcome, Nicole. I'm so happy that I could help the both of you. Almond flour. Cheryl's asking about almond flour. Almond flour is safe. I mean, it doesn't contain gluten. And again, sometimes what happens is people go overboard with almond flour. Look, you can go overboard with any food, and that you got to remember that there's a law of toxicity in the world, and that it basically states that anything in high enough quantities can become toxic. But water toxicity is drowning, right, or hyperhidrosis. But almonds, you can overdo it. I've seen people, they rub almond flour on everything. They drink 6 glasses of almond milk a day. They're pounding down fistfuls of almonds. And almonds are very high in omega-6 fat, and so you can imbalance your fatty acid ratio by over-consuming almonds. But again, almonds themselves are gluten-free and they're perfectly safe. All right. White potato. Okay, so I like this question because we didn't really talk about it in nightshades. No, these are not gluten mimickers. There's actually white potato and other nightshades. There's compounds in the nightshade family that with people with certain genetic markers don't do well with nightshades. And so generally speaking, it's not a gluten mimicking issue. It's a completely separate and different issue. But nightshades can be very, very problematic, especially where I've seen nightshades be problematic is in diseases of arthritis like rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis. These are autoimmune arthritides, and oftentimes these individuals have additional gene markers that make nightshades a bad idea for them to consume. So Jane says, you're a lifesaver. What about grass-fed, grain-finished beef? You know, I don't like the idea of that. If you can get grass-fed, grass-finished, and here's why. The grain-finished, how long was the grain finished? How long did the cow eat grain? You know, was it the last 6 months of its life? Was it the last 3 months of its life? Was it the last week of its life? Because the grain in a cow's diet in massive quantities changes the fat and the muscle tissue. And that, again, just like I was talking about almonds a minute ago, too high in omega-6 if you overdo it. The grain finished animals can be too high in omega-6 fats. And so it has nothing to do with gluten, but it has to do with imbalancing your fatty acid ratio more toward an inflammatory favor. And that, again, the name of the game, we want to live longer, we want to live happy and healthy. The name of the game is minimizing inflammation, right? It's trying to control inflammation and not have an overburdensome level of inflammation that contributes to illness and disease. Somebody's asking about chibi bread mix. Look, I don't recommend it. Not for, it's tapioca. I think the last time I looked at it, I can't recommend it or not recommend it because I haven't looked at a label in a very, very long time. And so, I'd have to really look at the ingredients on it and to give you a better answer for that question, Nancy. Oh, I love this comment here. So Deb says, just to add, every time I listen to you, I feel as though I'm not alone. It's so difficult to have so many intolerances and try to explain to others why you can't eat something. They look at you like you're crazy. You allow me to feel I'm keeping me healthy. Look, I love that comment for one reason. There are so many people that call people interested in eating right health nuts, right? That whole terminology, health nut, was really designed to ostracize people who just wanted to eat right. And to me, we live in this society where it's socially acceptable to kill each other with food. And that isn't, to me, that's not acceptable. So people that accept that, they're not in my circle. They're not in my inner circle. You've got to hang out with like-minded people so that you don't lose your sanity. Because today's world is very, I say today's world is very Alice in Wonderlandian-like, in the sense that up is down and down is up. In other words, we're being told that frankenfood is food. We're being told that you should get 40 some odd vaccines before your child is 2 years of age, and that's completely normal and safe, even though it isn't. We're being told all of these things about health that don't ring true. And the people that listen to these false truths are the sickest of the bunch, and they're also the most vehement against people who are trying to find their way out of that sickness. So, I'm glad Deb chimed in on that, because the reality is, we've got to stand together. We've got to create a movement and emotion so that, one, that we can justify each other's sanity, because it can be very, very challenging to navigate the insane world that we live in. And having a place where you can come hang out every Monday and feel like you're not crazy is valuable. So thank you for saying that. So Maria's asking broccoli, sprouts, and wheatgrass. Wheatgrass, no. So that's a great one. Wheatgrass is not a gluten mimicker. Wheatgrass is wheat, right? And a lot of times in these wheatgrass formulations, the seeds get in there. Remember that the gluten is in the seed, not in the grass, but the seeds get contaminated. And so a lot of these products will make a claim that they're gluten-free, but in actuality, I don't recommend any grass-based products with oatgrass, wheatgrass, barley grass, ryegrass, or any of those types of grass juices. Those green juices that are full of grasses are very problematic for people with gluten sensitivity. Don't recommend them. Oh, on the note, a lot of you are asking about bread. We've just finished up a formulation in our test kitchen, and we have got a low glycemic, in other words, a low carbohydrate and low blood sugar stimulating bread mix coming out in about 6 weeks. We're going to have it. It's called Warrior Bread, and I'm really super pumped about it. We'll put up a post here in a few weeks for those of you who are interested and checking it out. But we've already got it designed and drilled down, so we're really excited to bring that to help you kind of navigate some of what you can do in the kitchen. Yeah, I agree. Clover says one of the worst things about celiac is that instead of doing more whole food, they do processed gluten-free stuff and they get no relief. You're absolutely right. And they do processed non-gluten-free stuff as well, but it's being called gluten-free. Okay, so here's the quiz, right? What foods do you usually eat in one day? So for me, most days, well, I try to stick with what's seasonal. So like right now, what's in season, spinach is really good, and I like arugula. So right now in the mornings, I pile up a big salad full of spinach and arugula. I have a couple of eggs. They're grass pasture roaming eggs. I don't do the standard eggs. We definitely get the eggs made from from chickens who are out pasturing and not being just pumped full of grain. I do as well. I do a fistful of blueberries on that salad. I don't use any dressing at all, and I sprinkle either walnuts or almonds, sometimes pistachios. Sometimes I sprinkle other nuts. I like pecans are getting ready to come into season, so that's going to be one that I'm going to have a lot more as we move forward. But that's a really good summer salad for me in the mornings with the eggs, and then at lunch usually it's you know, I'm an intermittent faster, so I typically only eat a couple of meals a day. So a lot of times I'll just skip it, and then I'll eat dinner, and dinner is generally some type of meat, grass-fed, free-range, organic, just depending on what my wife is cooking in the kitchen. She's a whiz in the kitchen, so you know she's a lifesaver for our family because you know I can come home from a long day in the clinic, and she's made, like tonight we're having an almond crusted chicken that's been baked. And that's going to be fantastic. So, you know, that's a typical day for me. It's not, I don't eat a heavy quantity of food. Sometimes after a workout, I'll drink a protein shake from Ultra Pure Protein. But, you know, to me, keeping it lean, and a lot of people don't look at food stoically, and they should be looking at food stoically because, you know, the one thing that we know that prolongs the human lifespan is caloric restriction, eating less calories. And so many people, again, they justify eating more and more and more and more food as opposed to doing with less. And so I suggest that those of you struggling might consider fasting, either intermittent fasting or even consider a caloric reduction where you're not necessarily fasting, but you're just not eating as much food overall. Most people way overeat, and that's why we suffer with obesity rates and diabetic rates and heart disease rates and autoimmune disease rates in this country the way we do. Okay, guys, we're coming to the close of the hour, and there's just no way I'm getting through these questions. So that being the case, what I'd like to see is if you have questions that didn't get answered, if you've got show ideas, I want you to send those to us. Don't hold back. Send us those questions, comments at glutenology@gmail.com, and we are going to do our best to either, one, answer them in future shows, two, create future shows to cater to that entire list of categorical questions, or three, we try to create informational videos and blog posts for you that help answer those questions. So if you've got them and you didn't get them answered and you're frustrated because you hung on and didn't get your question answered, you know, generally the rule is first come, first serve. I try to answer them as they come in. But send them into glutenology@gmail.com. The other thing that I really would like you to do if you haven't done already, there are a couple of resources that we have for you. One is go to glutenfreesociety.org. Make sure that you sign up for our gluten-free survival kit. It's free, no cost to you. All you do is put in your name and email. We'll send that to you. And a lot more than just that. We'll send you tons of information about how to navigate this diet, including recipes and food ideas and other things as well. The other thing, make sure that you do is you go to our YouTube channel, and that is youtube.com/glutenology. Make sure that if you ever want to catch the replays, this is where we put them. We put them all up right there. So if you want to catch the replay, make sure you go and subscribe to us, youtube.com/glutenology. And just because I couldn't resist, I finally broke down and did one of those Instagram things. And if you want to check me out and you want to check us out and get more information on Instagram, you can do that right here, instagram.com/Dr. Osborne. You can sign up for Instagram and subscribe to our feed that way as well. So lots of ways to get information depending on what platform that you're on or where you like to hang out. But again, we're going to be back here next Monday night for another episode of the Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain Show. So again, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Send your email, send your questions to glutenology@gmail.com. We'll see you back next week. Have a great evening.